Hello friends, Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to my channel. I am Dr. Mariam Hassan and I make videos related to dentistry and medicine. So this video is the first one in the series of osteology of head and neck, in which I'll be discussing about the anterior view of the facial skeleton or the viscerocranium. And also I'll be discussing about the frontal bone in detail, its relation to adjacent bones and the foramina which are present in the frontal bone and the structures passing through those foramina. Also, I want to make a dedicated video on the maxilla, the mandible and the orbital cavities, so I'll not discuss those in detail in this video. So let's begin. So we have our Mr. Skull ready with us, and starting from top to bottom, I'll label the bones one by one. So the first one that I see is the frontal bone, which is the largest bone on the interior view. So here we have a zoomed in version of the frontal bone. And it has a little bit of markings to make it easy for understanding. So let's begin. The first thing that I'll be discussing is the frontal tuber. Just a minute, let me label it for you guys. So, okay, I'm talking about the frontal tuber. It is this green part, okay? And this is basically the rounded elevations of the frontal bone. They're just above the superciliary arches. So these are the superciliary arches over here. And this is the rounded protuberance or rounded elevations that are present, or the prominences that are present on the frontal bone just above the superciliary arches. Okay, so next thing that we'll be discussing is the superciliary arches. These are the prominences or the ridges of the frontal bone, and they're just above the orbital margins. So these are the ridges or the prominences of frontal bone. They're present just above the orbital margins. So now these are going to be the orbital margins, okay? And just above the orbital margins, we have the prominent ridges that are the superciliary arches. And then just above the superciliary arches, we have these rounded protuberances or the prominences, which are known as frontal tuber, okay? So now moving on towards the squamous part of frontal bone. This area or this part is known as the squamous part of frontal bone between the frontal tubers. So this is basically the largest part of frontal bone, and it forms the majority of the forehead, and it contains or houses the frontal air sinuses, that are the air-filled spaces which are present inside the cranial cavity. And these air-filled spaces or the frontal air sinuses act as voice resonators, and they communicate with the nasal cavity. Now we have got these frontal air sinuses, and these sinuses are separated in the middle with the help of bone. So we've got a pair of frontal sinuses. So now the next thing that I'll discuss with you guys is going to be the glabella. Glabella is going to be a smooth part of forehead between the eyebrows and above the eyebrows. So this is basically glabella. It is a smooth portion just between the eyebrows and above the eyebrows. So it is going to extend to like here. This is the glabella. Okay, and now the next thing that we'll be talking about is the temporal line of frontal bone. Now this is the temporal line of frontal bone over here. And this is basically the extension of inferior and superior temporal lines that extend from parietal bone onto the frontal bone. So now I'll be taking you guys to the foramina of the frontal bone. We've got two important foramina to remember. So the first one is the supraorbital foramen, and the second one is the frontal foramen. Now frontal foramen is present medial to the supraorbital foramen, and both of them are very close to the orbital margin. And supraorbital foramen basically houses the supraorbital nerves and the vessels, so it is very easy to remember as the name suggests. And also the area of supply of supraorbital nerve is basically the upper eyelids, the forehead and the scalp, but only up to the lambdoid suture. So we can remember that it starts from this area, upper eyelid, then it moves on to the forehead, and then it moves on to the scalp up to the lambdoid suture. Easy? Now let's move on towards the frontal foramen. Frontal foramen is basically present medial to the supraorbital foramen. So it has two structures. First one is the medial branch of the supraorbital nerve that was passing through here. Now supraorbital nerve was passing through here, and it gives off its medial branch that passes through the frontal foramen. And also the second structure that passes is the supratrochlear artery. Supratrochlear artery that passes through the frontal foramen. One of the important landmarks of the frontal bone is the metopic suture, which is present in the midline, and it is also known as frontal suture. It is also known as interfrontal suture or median frontal suture. The name that I would like you guys to remember is metopic suture. So this suture basically closes at about or fuses at about 3 to 9 months of age normally, and if the premature fusion occurs, which is known as, in this case, metopic synostosis, so there is a triangular shaped head. That individual is going to have a triangular shaped head. Now why? Because anteriorly the metopic suture is already fused prematurely, so there is going to be no growth in the anterior region, and the growth occurs normally in the posterior region of the head or the skull. So posterior sutures and posterior areas start to grow, but the anterior area lacks growth, and in that area there is going to be a narrowing, and posteriorly the skull is more broader, leading to a triangular shaped skull. So this case is known as metopic synostosis, in which there is going to be the trigonocephaly or a triangular shaped head. Okay, now let's talk about trochlear fovea. That is a structure which is present over here. This is the trochlear fovea, and this serves as a site of attachment for the superior oblique muscle of an eye. Okay, so this one is going to be the orbital part of frontal bone, and this area over here serves as the depression or a groove for the lacrimal gland. So lacrimal gland basically sits in this fossa. So in this area here we've got the nasal spine, but this is the nasal spine of frontal bone, and from here we've got the nasal bones that originate like this and they form the bridge of the nose. Okay, so this is the nasal spine of the frontal bone. This is a zygomatic process of frontal bone, and then we've got this area which is the sphenoidal process of frontal bone. This is going to be the sphenoidal margin of the frontal bone. This is the zygomatic margin of the frontal bone. Zygomatic bone basically merges over here with the frontal bone, and there is zygomaticofrontal suture over here. So I think that's it about the frontal bone, and now let's move on back to the interior view of the skull. Now coming back to the interior view after the detailed explanation of the frontal bone, now we'll be moving on downwards, and while moving down there are going to be two nasal bones that form the bridge of the nose with the maxilla, and their lower borders make the anterior nasal aperture. Now anterior nasal aperture is this triangular area over here, and this green bone is maxilla, paired maxilla, and this red bone or the paired bone is going to be the nasal bone. So we've got these two nasal bones, and they along with the maxilla they form the anterior nasal aperture. Now the nasal cavity is divided into two parts by the bony septum, which is largely formed by the vomer bone. Vomer bone is a singular bone, it is not a paired bone. And then we've got three important bones in the nasal cavity, that is superior, middle and inferior nasal concha. Now the superior and middle nasal conchas are basically the parts of ethmoidal bone, and the inferior concha is a separate bone. Now the red one, this structure that we see over here is the inferior concha, and this in the middle is going to be the nasal septum that is mainly formed by the vomer bone. And also we've got the superior and middle nasal conchas towards inside that are not that much visible. Other bones that are present are this is going to be zygomatic bone, the red colored. This is going to be the maxilla, the green colored, and then we've got the mandible or mandibula, which is blue colored. And also we've got some sutures over here. This is going to be zygomatico-maxillary suture. The This is going to be zygomaticofrontal suture, and this foramen is the infraorbital foramen. And I'll discuss maxilla in a detailed video along with the orbital cavity, its boundaries, and also the mandible. So that's it for today's video. I hope you liked it. Thank you for watching and have a nice day. Don't forget to subscribe my channel, like my video, and share it with your friends.